The Kamen Rider Gotchard and Geats crossover movie is currently playing in Japanese theaters, so there's no better time than now to take a look back at last summer's Geats movies, which just so happens to involve Gotchard. Hello everyone, it's thomasjujube, and be sure to let me know your thoughts on Kamen Rider Geats 4 Aces in the Black Fox, the summer movie of the season that also debuted Kamen Rider Gotchard. It's like their first crossover movie, but not just because of the cameo, because of like some other things, but I'll touch on that later. As a Kamen Rider summer film, this has almost everything I could ask for. It's a fun side story that can be enjoyed independently of the main season, which is what I always look for in these kinds of things, but it also adds some interesting context to the show's storyline, which I was not expecting. We might as well start with that because it has to deal with the main villains, Mela and Mello. Going into this movie from the trailers, I thought it was really jarring that we have this evil dark repaint of Geats, but it's like a clown making goofy voices, and like it is jarring in the film itself. A suit like this yelling happily doesn't fit to me, but that's kind of the point. It fits within the context of the film really well. That jarring difference in aesthetics and personality is kind of present throughout the entire film. Like, he's a dude dressed as a clown, actively trying to destroy the world, and then he's a goofy dude as an all-black Kamen Rider. It does make sense, kind of what they're going for there. I also like the duo of them, because they aren't particularly compelling villains since their goal is just world destruction, but making them a duo that's scarily competent with their actions, but they spend the whole time just goofing around, actually makes them slightly more terrifying. I don't know if anyone else got this vibe, but I kind of felt like they were like Joker and Harley Quinn in Kamen Rider. Like, with Mello's backstory in supplementary material, it's explained that she was like an archivist that joined Mela because he was crazy and she thought that was interesting. That supplementary material also says they go on to kill like a bunch of gods, like real gods like Loki and Thor and all that in the world of Kamen Rider Geats. That's something interesting to think about. I also thought it was so fascinating the little exposition they drop about the future in the world of Geats. They say that in the future, Earth is destroyed by a race of plant monsters and the human race now lives as digitized beings in space, and those plant monsters became the basis of the Yamato. So it makes me wonder if this kind of idea was originally meant to be used in the season of Kamen Rider Geats, like maybe a version where the Yamato went on to be the final antagonists, because it feels like an important bit of lore, not just for like the DGP, but like the entire world of Geats. And it doesn't really affect anything in the show, like knowing that these beings are like kind of digital, like they kind of actually say that. It could also just be meant as setup for the upcoming V-Cinema, since we know that's meant to be focused on the Yamato, and that's actually also saying that the Yamato were not creations of the DGP, they are a future Earth enemy. I think that's kind of interesting that like they drop important lore to Geats, but you don't need it to understand the show. I also think the cross Geats form is pretty incredible. Unpopular opinion, I don't really care much for the suit itself. Black and blue repaint, it does nothing for me, to be honest, but I do think it's fascinating that besides the helmet, it shares no parts with the Geats 9 suit, but it's meant as a repaint of Geats 9. Then the name Cross Geats uses an X, pronounced cross, Roman numeral 10, because it comes after 9, Geats 9. The number name is like said before instead of after, and the pronunciation of cross Geats in Japanese is kurosu Geats, cut off a bit, and it's kuro Geats, which also means black Geats. Puns are fun. Okay, we've covered one half of the title, the Black Fox. What about the other half, the 4 Aces? I think it's a ton of fun. Ace's actor does such a great job conveying these silly personalities, and I never could have imagined Ace as a character could be so funny. I think my favorite variant is Lucky Ace because of all the little expressions and the physical comedy he's involved in, but I also thought Cowboy Ace was also really funny in more of a meta sense, like seeing Ace just be completely clueless about everything, and the fact he fights exactly like Buffa with the Magnum shooter, but Buffa himself is like, stop fighting like that, use the gun normally, but you don't use the gun normally when you fight. Intelligent Ace was boring, he doesn't do anything, but to be honest, all 3 of the Aces don't really do anything, and that is my biggest issue with the movie. They do what's necessary for the story, but the thing is, they set up the plotline with Ace and the world being split into 4, and the Aces get up to goofy shenanigans, and then it feels like almost instantly they get absorbed absorbed and the world returns to normal. Honestly, I would have preferred if the movie started with the world already split into 4, then we just get some quick exposition or flashbacks explaining how this happened, and then the big beginning action scene is the cast fighting and slowly realizing that they are all in different locations, and each location has a different Geats acting differently. That way the timeline of things doesn't change, we don't really affect the pacing of the movie, we just spend a bit more time with the other aces now. This also isn't a problem, I just think it would have been awesome to have the other aces transform into other Geats variants. Could have been anything as simple as each ace uses one of his different forms, like one's in Magnum, one's in Boost 2, maybe one's in Laser Boost or Command, or if they wanted to do something really cool, they could have made slight repaints or variations on the Geats helmet, since they are technically different aces, and it would make sense that it could create different versions of the Geats core locked to his DNA, and then they could even sell us more core IDs, more toys to sell. Why didn't they do this? While I'm talking about aces' different forms, I do think it's funny as hell that the Geats base form, Magnum Boost, does not make a single appearance in this movie. I believe it's the first Rider base form to not appear in a movie, which is pretty par for the course for Magnum Boost within the lore of Geats. One last thing about the Geats forms, I am a little disappointed that we introduced this dark repaint of Geats 9, but it doesn't actually face off against the real Geats 9. Yes, it makes sense in the movie, and I actually do think it's a cool concept, but if you set it up like I said, where each ace uses a different form of Geats, then you could have had Heart Ace left with the Geats 9 buckle, and then he faces off against Cross Geats. Like, come on, it's such a missed opportunity, even if it makes sense in the movie. Like, come on, it's such a missed opportunity to not have these repaints fight each other when they are technically two different suits. One last thing that's not an issue, but is just confusing to me, is the placement in the show's timeline. The Cross Geats cameo in the show, we can just ignore that because the aforementioned supplementary material has retconned that as an illusion that Mela makes so cool. It can take place whenever. But then in the movie, the very first thing that happens is the announcement of a treasure hunting Desire Grand Prix game. So like, with the appearance of a purified Bujin sword, this has to take place after the show, because there's no way it fits into the main show's timeline, since after purified Bujin sword debuts, it's the entire endgame. The show kind of implies that Keiwa is the only one that remembers being a Kamen Rider since he has his core ID, but maybe the implication is that everyone got their ID cores and buckles back. But then there's the issue of this being a Desire Grand Prix game, but Jean is the only one who actually says it's a Desire Grand Prix game, so maybe he was just goofing off, and in universe there wasn't going to be a game. But then if Ace is in full god mode, shouldn't the other characters have forgotten about him, and why is he interfering in this kind of event if he's just meant to be a god? So with Jean acknowledging us as the audience and Sumeri straight up saying that Geats won this is because of the audience wishes, I kind of wonder if the intent is just implying this film is non-canon, just a fun little story for the audience of Kamen Rider Geats to enjoy. Obviously this doesn't affect my opinion of the show, but it's an interesting discussion to have about the film. Be sure to comment your theories about the timeline placement if you have any. The main plotline with Heart Ace and the story's messages are easily what elevate this from a fun Kamen Rider movie to an amazing Kamen Rider movie. I love it uses the plot of Ace being split up into his different personalities to physically portray the concept that the most important part of a Kamen Rider is their heart. Cross Geats thinks that strength and intelligence are the only components that matter for a strong Kamen Rider, and he physically rejects the usage of Heart Ace for this form, causing it to have a dark and evil appearance. So I think it's awesome that by stripping Ace's personality down so that he has nothing but his heart, he ends up being the most pure form of the character, and it ends up empowering his allies to put his faith into them in creating the most colorful and bright of all of Geats' forms. And with the heart of a Kamen Rider in its physical form as Geats Oneness, it manages to defeat the evil version of Geats that does not retain the heart of a Kamen Rider. Speaking of Geats Oneness, this has got to be like one of the greatest Kamen Rider forms ever. I did unbox the toy a few months ago if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts on the buckled toy and some of the other Ride Chemi cards. But discussing the form in regards to the film, as mentioned, I think it's a perfect encapsulation of the movie's themes, and it genuinely felt like it was built up throughout the entire runtime, even though it's not explicitly like, hey, this Geats Oneness form, it is coming. It's only used in the final battle like most movie forms, but it still makes a hell of an impact, and it's incredibly satisfying to see. I also love that it uses the Mark III buckle on the bottom half, since that was only used in the actual show like that on the top, so it's really cool to see that it can be swapped around like a normal buckle. And then the other gimmick item uses a Ride Chemi card, the gimmick of the next season. So taking a brief detour to talk about Gotchard's cameo cameo in this. It's pretty standard for Kamen Rider. You know, he acts a little different compared to the actual show. He uses alchemy as a Kamen Rider. He actually recites as the one of blah 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 thing. I don't know the spells in Gotchard. That's the only spell they ever use in Gotchard. That spell, I have the same opinion as everyone else. This alchemy attack thing is really cool, and I wish that he did it in the show, blah blah blah. But also, like, he randomly gives Kalo a blank card at the end. That's important alchemist property. You need that to get rid of amalgams. I don't know why you just gave this old man that. Kalo doesn't even give it to Geats, so like it doesn't even matter that he gave it to Kalo. He could have just dropped it. Maybe in the show the movie would be the same. It's weird that this one blank Chemi card manages to survive the destruction of the world. None of the other blank Chemi cards that Gotchard just always carries around. Anyways, I'm over dissecting this. I've seen some speculation that maybe this takes place after the Gotchard Geats movie, and this is a more experienced Hotaro after we've seen him in the show. That's why he's able to use his alchemy powers. I don't think we're ever gonna get an explanation for this. I think it's just whatever you want to make of it. Who cares, because it creates a Kamen Rider gimmick toy that uses a completely different gimmick outside of a standard crossover. I also just think the form looks neat. As mentioned, the bottom half is just the bottom half of Geats 9, which is pretty interesting. I like that it incorporates all the ID core symbols of the main riders of the film, and the rainbow motif is appropriate for Ukiyo Ace. Also, it has like a Wonder Ride book on the chest. I don't know what they were thinking with that, but make sure you let me know your thoughts on Geats 1 in the comment section. I had a lot of fun watching it, and it was great to jump back into the world of Geats once again, but as mentioned, there is still more to come. If you want to hear my thoughts on those upcoming Gotchard and Geats stories, be sure to check out my Patreon for early access and exclusive content, or subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next time.